Welcome back to the Purpose Fitness Times Nutrition podcast. Today on episode 25, I'm joined with a very special guest, Coach Nicholas Weir, who is the owner of Universal Performance, an IFBB Classic Physique competitor, and also very fortunate Purpose Nutrition sponsored athlete. Welcome, my man.
Thanks for having me, man.
Anytime. It's obviously a pleasure to have you on. We've been very excited. I've been looking forward to having you on. I want to be testing some knowledge today, talking all things about biochemistry, getting, I guess, under the sheets when it comes to the fitness industry. You know, when we look at the fitness industry, there's a lot of surface area knowledge going around. Obviously, now with you going into biochemistry studies, which people listening now, Nicholas is also, studying biochemistry, much like myself. And obviously, when you get to that kind of level of study, you realize a lot more below the sheets in terms of the internal systems, hormones, cell regulations, homeostasis, negative feedbacks, all of that processes. So today, obviously, your main sort of forte is working with athletes as well, and also the application of pharmacology. So today we're going to go into that, into a lot of depth, cover that, give the guys a lot of helpful information. So, some warnings, some new things, old versus new methods, and so forth. But before we get into that, can you give the guys and the listeners a little bit of an insight to who you are?
Yeah, okay. So, you introduced me pretty well, to be honest, like in a nutshell. My name is Nicholas Weir, online coach, full-time online coach. Been doing that full-time for a few years now. Before that, I did also do face-to-face coaching, and I wouldn't sound like I'm one of the, I suppose, leaders in the coaching industry, but I like to consider myself a bit of a vetted coach. I've been online coaching at least part-time since 2013, so it's been about a decade now. Yeah,
going on 10 years.
Yeah, but I got into bodybuilding after I retired from powerlifting about 2 years ago, competitively that is. But prior to bodybuilding, I was a competitive powerlifter at the international level. Won world titles as a junior in 2015 over in Vegas, and I basically started lifting after having anorexia in the end of high school, and basically it was my way of self-recovery. I dove into it pretty much as aggressively as you could, and I just really worked on growing, improving my relationship with food and that sort of thing. And although it's usually best to get like a professional to help you with that, I just took the kind of like the long approach and the, I suppose, the harder road of doing it yourself. And one thing led to another, and I just fell in love with the process, and studying, like you said, at university now, so doing a Bachelor of Biomed, predominantly like in the area of biochemistry and genetics. That's where my forte is, where I'm kind of like, I suppose, majoring and specifying my studies. And I did my first bodybuilding season last year. That was season A with IFBB, and I did classic physique, won first timers, and went to nationals. Didn't do as well as I was hoping for, but I got a lot of good feedback from the judges, and I know where I need to improve next time. And loving it.
Wow, so that was the first show.
Yeah, that was my first show. Yeah.
Holy shit.
But I don't know. I was just like, as long as I get top 10, I'll be happy. And so it was a nice thing on the cake to kind of take that. But I definitely didn't do as well in opens, but that was purely self-inflicted. I should have put more time into posing, especially, and then also just getting a little bit more conditioned. But you live and you learn.
Mate, you were impressive for a first show. So, and especially given that you coach yourself. So not many people, one, can coach themselves, do what you're doing, coach other people, also study, because you're studying at that point as well. So credit to you. Like, you turned up on stage and looking like you're a seasoned competitor. So, I didn't realize that was your first show. So that's impressive.
Oh, I appreciate that. Yeah, because it was actually where I met you for the first time. It was athlete check-ins, and basically I was normally I am 6'1.5", but obviously when you get super lean, you lose body fat from everywhere in your body, and a lot of people don't know, but you've actually got quite a lot of fat in your feet, the bottom of your feet, your fat pads there. You've also got some additional like cushioning and fluid through your like torso, and as soon as you lose all of that body fat, that obviously causes you to get a little bit shorter. And then in addition to that, like when you're kind of trying to, like, I suppose, reduce your water like retention in the body as much as possible in those final weeks of prep, it does tend to have a bit of a shrinking effect on you. And I got dropped down into the next weight cap, and I'm like, oh, I'm not going to be able to compete if I don't get back to my normal height. And so I had, you and a few other people helping me just decompress. And it was.
I was there with my athletes, getting ready for them to, get weighed in and checked in, and you were running around stressed out, sweat coming off the forehead. Like, dude, what's going on? You're like, I can't make my height, and I was like, oh, let's have a look at you, and so basically, like, I stepped in and helped stretch you out. You're very tight, and for guys who don't know, like, obviously when you're at a point of hours out at this point, like Nick said, you lose body fat from the feet, but at the same time, you also get like high levels of stress. And when your body's that dehydrated, what causes actually increases the tension balance in the muscles. So everything starts to tighten up and you get quite stiff and quite sore. It's why it's always important to get like massages and release that. And Nick was quite jacked up through the thoracic, and his quads were almost ready to snap when I was stretching him. But
hypertonicity, right?
Yeah. But we got there. We got you stretched out, and you made your height class. So
by like that much.
Yeah. So we did stretching. I was pouring in sweat, stretching him out. We had you hanging off the bars for minutes at a time. Yeah. And that's the stuff that people don't see behind the scenes. But that was actually, that was our first time in meeting. So, and we've evolved from now. And now you, are a sponsored athlete with us here at Purpose Nutrition. So, our one little conversation can change the game, hey?
Yeah, it's funny,
But so obviously you also spoke about, before we move on to the sort of the athlete side of things, you surprised me. I actually never knew that you were an international powerlifter.
Yeah.
And went to Las Vegas. Like, that's impressive.
I was a bit of a lazy powerlifter, I'm not going to lie. I was that powerlifter that did the main lift and kind of just like walk out of the gym after that. So I was very efficient for like my body weight at the time, but I probably could have been a bit bigger when I was a powerlifter, and it would have served me well and probably wouldn't have got as many injuries. But I did that for a while, and it was fun, but I think I was always wanting to do bodybuilding, but I was just too, caught up in what other people thought, other people's preconceptions of bodybuilding and how it's seen as being a little bit feminine or like not masculine, I guess, because you're oiling up, getting into some posing trunks and flexing on stage, and whereas like powerlifting, you're just getting angry and you're ripping weight off the floor. So I thought, being a young guy, I wanted to kind of, prove something to people, and that was my way of doing it, even though deep down I wanted to be a bodybuilder.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. Was that sort of the environment that you were in, where that concept of bodybuilding was a bit like a feminine side, getting oiled up and jumping into some jocks and strutting your shit? Was that sort of like that environment that the powerlifters kind of perceived of the bodybuilders?
I to a degree, I think it is a stereotype imposed by the powerlifting community. And I don't think it's intentional, or at least not entirely intentional. A lot of it's just, a collective, conceptualization of what it is that just develops from everybody being in a community, I guess. Yeah. But I mean, there was that, and then also I was never really that big guy in school. I was always that skinny kind of runt. Like, I was 57 kilo in year 12. And so I over 6 foot, 57 kilos, like dripping wet. Like you definitely feel like you, don't measure up to other people sometimes. And I suppose insecurity is what drives a lot of us to get into lifting weights in the first place. And so coming from a place of insecurity and striving for self-improvement, I think, I just thought, it's people, if I'm like super strong and angry, people will respect me, sort of thing. Yeah. So it was that with the few powerlifters at my local gym at the time that kind of, rubbed off on me their perception of bodybuilding, and I thought, I better not do bodybuilding. They'll give me shit for doing that. So I sort of gravitated to powerlifting.
Yeah. You've made the flip over now, so it's good. You're in where you wanted to be. But it's super. I really appreciate your honesty on this podcast, man. It's not easy to talk about insecurities and an upbringing and being skinny. Me and you have similar time frames. I was tall. What am I? I'm about 6'2". So 182, 183 centimeters. And in school, I was a stick. I was fat as a little kid and then got it as a stick. And that's what also drove me in. You're trying to compete. And no one likes to be a little stick. Exactly. And that's exactly why we kind of founded the Purpose Group, which is what we call the Purpose Capital. Is we help people find their purpose through the avenues of health and fitness. Because, like you said, you've come in at a weaker point in your life or from a starting point in your life as you're transitioning out of school into adulthood. And look who it shaped you to be. You know, you found, and I'll put it back over to you. Do you think doing the powerlifting and going to bodybuilding and just entering through health and fitness pathway that you've found who you are and your purpose in life?
Yeah, I definitely think I have to a degree, hey. And I want to make the distinction between bodybuilding and lifting weights, I suppose, creating confidence rather than it just kind of like helps direct you to doing the things you need to do to become confident. Like a lot of people have this misconception, I think, and you'd probably agree, when they get into lifting, they think, oh, if I get big or when I get this big, I'll feel confident and I won't be insecure anymore. But it's definitely not the case. It's more a case of along the way as you work towards that goal through that entire process, it's the skills and the habits and the routines that you develop that lead to that confidence, because confidence, it's not something you can fake. It comes from like irrefutable evidence that like you are basically who you are, sort of thing.
Yeah, and you're confident with who you are and in your internal environment. Not what a lot of people say to you.
Because some of the biggest guys in the gym, like they're some of the most insecure people, and a lot of people don't actually realize that that's the case. Predominantly like beginners and novices who are first kind of getting into the gym and that whole kind of environment and culture. A lot of them think, oh, that jacked guy must be like super confident and like great with the ladies. And a lot of the time, half the guys can't even speak to a female for more than 2 minutes at a time. They just
can't hold a conversation.
They can't hold a conversation because their life just completely revolves around lifting weights, and that's all they can talk about, all they can do. But yeah, I definitely think it helped shape me into the person that I am today. It's given me, I suppose, more elements to my overall character.
Yeah, built up strengths and taught you different skill sets you didn't have applied before.
Yeah, like the whole, if you just work hard and work hard consistently at something, eventually you will get there.
Yeah,
whereas before I had this perception before I got into lifting, like, oh, so-and-so's really talented, is gifted, that's why he's the best in this sport. Like I used to do rugby and stuff like that through school, and even lacrosse for a short period and sprinting, and I just always thought I was like half decent at stuff, but I never fully applied myself, and I always looked at that guy in the class or in the team that was just at the top, and I thought, I'm never going to be able to get to that status. But I mean, it's the whole iceberg, I suppose, phenomenon. You see the tip of the iceberg, but you don't see all this other stuff that they're doing in the background. Like, for all I knew, that guy who was at the top of my sprinting team could have been like putting in 10 hours of training a week, and I just didn't see it because I only ever saw him at sprint practice. It's like he could have been doing all this stuff outside of it, and he could have been dialing his nutrition in, sleeping incredibly like dialed in to like a very strict schedule, and if he was doing all that, then I mean, more of his skill and more of his success is attributed to his efforts rather than his God-given talent, I suppose.
His natural abilities.
Yeah, and I think that's what the big thing that bodybuilding taught me, or just lifting weights in general. If you apply yourself and you just have relentless self-belief and just keep doing what's necessary, going through those daily habits, ticking those boxes, another brick in the wall every single day, and eventually you've built the house. And yeah, I think that's probably the most rewarding thing that came from it, and it obviously carries over, like you'd agree, to other areas of life like business, even relationships. You realize, okay, in order to have a successful relationship, you can't just like rock up and be present once a week. You've got to repeatedly show effort. You've got to repeatedly do these small little things, because it's not about doing big extravagant things. It's about being consistent. And it's like, if you don't have consistency in anything in life, you're not
those bricks.
Yeah.
Yeah. You gave me goosebumps when you said those. It's just like, you just hit it on the head. It's just like that, laying that foundation and just, building those bricks and applying that through everything we do. And it's quite right. And that's why exactly what we try and get people into the space for. That's exactly what we stand for, is that people don't realize the positive attributions that health and fitness have in every facet of life. But to take on from that, obviously health and fitness is what shaped you, who you are today. I want to take it back into sort of, and we're going to apply this more towards now, the pet usage. And do you think, obviously coming from where you came from, that obviously you got into the powerlifting and rolling over to the bodybuilding, At what point did obviously the ped use come in? And do you think the usage was driven from a point of the insecurity, or was it driven due to the point of where you want to excel yourself to?
It was the latter, where I wanted to excel myself to. Yeah, don't get me wrong. When I was earlier in my lifting career, I suppose, like when I was first getting into it, the thought of using that stuff crossed my mind. And back then, if I had have done it, it would have been insecurity driven. But it was kind of more towards the tail end of, I suppose, a competitive powerlifting career of like, okay, I want to be the best I can be. So I started looking into that stuff, and yeah, that's kind of where it really kind of took off. But yeah, I do acknowledge and realize that both can be motivating factors, and some people do dive into it because of insecurities, and it is predominantly insecurity driven for some people.
A lot of people.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're not much the same because you're up at Brisbane Way. I'm sure you see it quite a lot at that gym. There's a lot of boys, pretty much like 80-90% of the population in those kind of environments are on stuff, but don't even look like they've ever trained a day in their life.
Teenagers even, yeah. Like, I mean, it's so much more accessible these days too, and I think that's part of it. I mean, when you and I were first getting into lifting, I mean, the internet was around and stuff, but it was more like bodybuilding forums and stuff. That was the only source of information, and now I've got all this short form content, and people are just so much more, I suppose, connected these days. I wouldn't have a single clue of how to obtain or acquire anything in the first few years of lifting, but these days it seems to me like guys already have connections before they even get a gym membership, and it just blows my mind at like how easily obtainable it is these days. And I think that is definitely part of, I suppose, the reason why we see so many people just jump on it immediately. But there's also the whole case of society, I think, as a whole, is getting conditioned more and more to be, I suppose, more and more impatient, have a shorter attention span with all of this short form content and long form content becoming a thing of the past. I mean, podcasts are fantastic. I love them, and I'm sure you'd agree. And like even long YouTube videos and stuff of that nature, or like lecture recordings that have been put online, because you can learn so much information from them, and you can get so much insight and gain other perspectives on a plethora of different like topics and areas. But people's attention spans these days are just so limited. Like TikTok, it's like people just aimlessly scroll through that, phantom scrolling. They won't read a post these days. Most people won't read a post. They just want a quick 15, 30-second video, and if they can't have that, they don't want it. They're not interested. And it's, I think, a big part of that impatient nature of society these days feeds into the whole, I want instant gratification. I can't endure the process of delaying gratification for a long-term reward at the end of the road.
And a stable reward too. You know, something that you can keep for a bit longer.
Yeah.
But you hit the nail on the head, instant gratification. I was going to interrupt you and say that. I was like, exactly what it is. Like, and it's just, I can't even, what you said was just everything I would say. It's just the population now, like you said, it's just getting very, and also entitled as well. Everyone thinks that they deserve everything as well. So, you got a combination of being impatient, wanting, to be the best on day one. The process and the process of enjoying the journey and learning the journey and actually making the journey what is fun rather than the result, that's now gone. And like we said, like when you came into the game of health and fitness, it was actually the process of building those bricks and adding those bricks and also applying those kind of laying of brick foundations into everything, business, relationships. That's actually what shapes you. And I think that's what people don't understand or forget about is like laying those bricks. They teach you far more than what, quickly injecting something or, grabbing something for the first time before doing those brick laying foundations will give you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a very interesting time.
Yeah. I mean, you'd probably agree with me. The level of understanding that most users have is well below rudimentary. Like I've had people come. Yeah. I mean, you've probably had this too. I'll give you an example. Like like an initial consultation with a new potential client, and they come to you and they mention they're enhanced in their inquiry, and you obviously prod a little bit in the conversation, the consultation to get further information. Like, okay, well, what's like your blood work like? Have you had blood work done? What's your prior usage and that sort of thing? And they'll talk in terms of meals, like, oh, I've done a cycle of 12 weeks with 1 or like 2 mils of testosterone per week, and 2 mils of Deca, and I'm like, okay, but how many milligrams? And they said, like milligrams, yes. And then you say, yeah, like how many milligrams? Because the concentration will vary depending on the product. Like testosterone isn't just always, say, 100 milligrams per mil or 200 milligrams per mil or 250 milligrams per mil. It can vary. And so, like, did you even look on the vial to see the actual milligrams that you were taking per week? And they said, well, no, like I didn't know I was meant to. And then you just think to yourself, like, these people they're like toddlers, just in injecting themselves with potentially seriously harmful drugs. Well, they are harmful when used improperly, and yeah, they don't seem to grasp the reality of it, or the the seriousness.
Yeah, and that's something we see all the time. Like I said before, like we see, half or probably more towards 80% of the gym scene now, in specific gym environments, are on, and you wouldn't even know.
Yeah, they don't look like they lift, and it's because like you touched on before, and like I did, like they haven't laid down that foundation, they haven't put those bricks in.
And that's that refers all the way back to that insecurity. Is people are getting on because one, their bros are doing it, so it sounds cool, and then now also stems from a place of insecurity. You've got all these good-looking people coming around now, social media showing constant feeds of what their typical scrolling habits of numbness, dopamine hits are doing, which is all just good-looking people, and successful people, because that's what everyone's into at the moment. And it's just feeds and feeds and feeds, and it's just building this very unhealthy, and again, entitled, self-limiting sort of environment.
I agree. Yeah. It's pretty toxic, and it's very detrimental too, even though it might not be that obvious to most of us who are online and on social media using it. But it can be very harmful to not only your progress, but your overall, I suppose, mental health too. And it's really important that we, I suppose, check ourselves before we wreck ourselves.
Yeah. And that's a very good point. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. And that's exactly why we're going to want to talk about this on the podcast, because everyone has their opinion, everyone has their advices, and there's so many different methods, so many different ways, so many different, opinions in the game. But, it's like, science doesn't lie. And the good thing about what we do is we're understanding that science. We understand the cells, the hormone regulations, the genetics is what you're currently into at the moment. So, you know what I mean? So, like, you've got the bro talks, and then you've got the medical side. And I'm sure I'm not alone here that, what you used to do, and then also what you've been doing until you started studying, you're like, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then you look at the industry and you're like, wow.
Pretty much.
There's no other words but just wow.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of leaves you speechless, doesn't it? You think to yourself, oh, and you reflect on some of the stuff you did, and you think, like, looking back now, with what you know and what you've learnt since then, wow, that was a little bit reckless and irresponsible. But then you look at what the rest of the industry or the I suppose community are doing these days, and it's just like it's still nowhere near as bad as that. You just think, what the hell? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
Where's this disconnect coming from? Yeah. It's pretty sad.
Yeah, and that's why we're going to hopefully try and educate and squish it today with a bit of helpful information and sources. I guess coming from when you entered, like we said, what we did back in the day, we were like, oh my goodness, to what we do now. What's the biggest thing you've learned about, let's apply it to, exogenous hormones, androgens. What's the biggest thing you've learned about that application? That's really changed the way you think?
Okay, so I always used to think, I suppose drugs and I suppose exogenous hormones, to narrow that down a little bit more, played a bigger role than they actually do back when I first started looking into it. And I used to have certain compounds up on a pedestal in my mind, thinking these compounds were superior in some way. But obviously, as your understanding of everything improves and as your repertoire of knowledge around the topic of the matter grows, it broadens the horizon and allows you to kind of see things more clearly. It's like when I first started looking into it, even though I had a bit of an understanding, like you'd agree with the whole Dunning-Kruger effect, you think you know a lot more than you do in the beginning. And then you have that moment, that epiphany or that moment of self-realization where you come to the conclusion that I actually know jack shit. There is so much out there that I do not understand yet. And then you go from being at the peak of the Dunning-Kruger scale or the Dunning-Kruger graph to just diving down, like crashing incredibly quickly. And you go from being overly confident to very insecure in your understanding of everything. And you just want to pursue, I suppose, an improved understanding of everything. You want to learn as much as you possibly can to, I suppose, rectify that feeling of intellectual insecurity.
Yeah, and I'm sure you would agree with me here, touched on that like you entered study and you're like, wow, I've learned so much to what I did now. But then now you're like, shit, there's so much more to be learned.
Exactly, yeah.
Like, and that's the process of like, you've just got, unfortunately, like, you just got to start, because it's the process of constantly reinvesting and learning, where you eventually, accumulate over the time of 20 years. That's where you become really good. And again, we're living in the era where education's coming out so rapidly now. Like, you might learn something now which is applicable for the year. Next year there's something new that's come out. So but like, yeah, I've noticed with myself, I've learned stuff and I'm like, wow, like what I do now is completely different to what I used to do. Yeah. But even now I'm like, I still question what I do, because I'm like, there's still more to be learnt. You know what I mean? And it's just that inevitable process of learning, and then you always question that again.
Yeah, I think it's like it's intellectual maturity. It's the way I like to look at it. Like I suppose the more you learn, the more you realize, like you said, you don't know much. Like the more you learn, the more you realize there's more to learn. That's probably a better way of framing it. And yeah, I think honestly, it makes you revisit some of your old approaches to just suppose, solving problems. Like if you learn more about PED usage and then you revisit how you would have approached that initially, you can see a lot more flaws in that initial model, or that first way of, I suppose, addressing that. Yeah. You just see all of the mistakes that you were making the first time you kind of tried to, I suppose, come up with a solution.
Yeah, that's it. Just being aware of what you've done before. Now, I want to take you back to that. So, like, the very first model that you sort of deployed, where did it come from?
That's the concerning thing. I mean, a lot of it was just from reading on bodybuilding forums, to be completely honest, and that's where I kind of learn a lot. And then I also did a little bit of diving into some studies, because I did have an understanding and access to a few online journals and so databases for scientific literature. And I found an old study on testosterone showing that the muscle accrual over the course of a period of time was pretty much identical with the people who use 300 milligrams versus 600 milligrams per week. So it definitely taught me that more wasn't necessarily better, which was definitely a good lesson to learn early on, I think, because I know a lot of people don't learn that early on and they fall into the trap of using a lot in the beginning and just basically overshooting it. And they could have gotten the same outcome and the same results, or even potentially better, by keeping their liver and kidney function more intact, so their body could actually process various metabolites better. And so they're actually able to build muscle more efficiently at that lower dose. But I mean, learning that less is sometimes more.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, my initial understanding of how to, I suppose, assemble a course was read forums. What did Joe Blow in Texas do? and then that one study. That's all I kind of had. And over time, you probably remember Lewin's Anabolics book that started to become a little bit popular on the forums, and a lot of people were uploading that in PDF form to like torrent sites and stuff. And I downloaded that and I started reading that a little bit. But even that's somewhat flawed and a little bit outdated now.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of where I got it from. But I ended up, just forums was my main source of information back then, which is not a good source of information.
And that's what a lot of people do, because unfortunately it's what's around and what's available. And unfortunately, when they go into studies, they don't have, like, as you would understand, like the studies have certain little, like, terminologies or code words or, abbreviations. And like, as you would know, it's very hard to understand unless you can read that kind of literature.
Yeah.
So, that's why like forums just, I would say a dumbed down version, just, Blow talking his own personal experience. They're like, oh, that's sick. Oh, we're going to do that. Now, one thing I'm going to touch on, you said before that you said you had these platforms that where you put these certain compounds on a higher platform or podium.
Oh yeah.
And then one thing that I remember back in the day reading like forums, especially at USA. USA is very different when
Did
it
you
comes to
ever
Australia.
read GH15's forums? GH15?
I probably would have, but I can't remember. Yeah. But, you know, on those forums, like back in the day, it was all like these T400s, Halo tests, like all of these super, you know, powerful, high-loaded compounds was what everyone's preached about, because they always thought like, oh, this is more per dosage. It's going to give me all this amazing thing, or it's got 4 blends in here. This is going to give me everything.
The anabolic androgenic rating. Yeah, remember that? How that was? Yeah.
So, you know, was that something that you did? Like you sort of read those kind of things, or like, you know, for example, like, you know, trends and stuff like that, and people were like, this is the god products of the game. Yeah. And that's where you kind of base that podium level off.
Yeah, sort of like, regrettably, that is where I, originally kind of put certain compounds up on a pedestal above others in terms of efficacy, like how effective or potent they were. And I thought some built muscle better than others. And I always used to, there's a big flaw, and it's still very prevalent in the industry, and you'll probably agree with me. A lot of people associate side effects with effectiveness. Like people think if I'm not getting side effects from a drug, it's weak. It's not doing enough. It's not helping. They can't feel it, therefore it's not working. And if you can feel your drug, the dosage is either too high or you're not using the right compound. Like you don't want to feel it. You want to be on without feeling. You want to feel normal. There's when no disruption
to your normal life.
Yeah, your recovery should just feel better. That is literally the only thing you should notice, that you just recover from training better.
And you've got good libido. Yeah. You know, not this, what is it? Like
amped up, super aggressive, like heart rate pump, like crazy blood splitting pumps. Yeah.
Like it's just not, like I see so many guys like, oh yeah, it doesn't work. Oh, my missus doesn't like me. I'm like, dude.
Yeah, like they'll say, oh, I know this is like what I'm doing, but it just doesn't feel like how when I was on train, I could just feel it working. I'm thinking to myself, no, you couldn't feel it working. You're experiencing negative effects of the drug. Yeah, the exact things that you want to avoid feeling or experiencing, because that's what's going to contribute to negative health or health degradation over time and accelerate it.
And beautiful, and you got the girls that are like, oh, I'm not shaking, I need to up my dose.
But no, your body acclimates to the dose. It's still working. It's just your tolerance to it.
Not as sensitive. Yeah, so that's a big thing that people need to take away. Like I see the same in caffeine. They're like, oh, I don't feel the rush or the heart attacks anymore. It's like, it's still wiring up your brain. Yeah. Like your neurotransmitters are on. Like you don't need any more caffeine. And it's just more and more and more. And like we know with caffeine application, the more you have, the greater adrenal fatigue we get, the increase of cortisol. And that's the thing that people don't understand is like when you apply a drug, right, it's a foreign property or compound entering the body. So the body treats it until it can recognize what it is. And it's going to treat it like foreign. So, you know, when we apply these things, it also increases oxidative stress levels in the body. And that's something that people don't understand. And that's where we typically can see if people were overdoing the doses or, upsetting their hormones or whatever, you know, a lot of acne formation is actually caused because of the oxidative stress levels.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's been a big process that I've mastered in my time, was understanding oxidative stress effects in the body, because not only does it affect, you know, skin or, you know, liver, you know, it also affects, you know, inflammation. You know, it's just inevitable. Yeah. So this is the thing that people understand is like, you're putting something into the body, it's a stressor. No matter if it's going to help with the recovery, it's still an internal compound that's going to apply stress to the body. Yeah. And that's where we get those effects from, and people don't understand that.
Exactly, yeah. And it's like you've got to choose the stress you want, because every stress applied to the body will elicit a stress response from the body.
Correct.
It's like building muscle is a stress response. It's like a reflex. You're applying stress in the form of mechanical tension, like muscle damage, metabolic fatigue, to your muscles, and then your body is going, oh crap, this is damaging me. Like I need to basically build this tissue so it's more resilient, it can withstand more tensile load.
Yeah, and resist against the stressor.
Yeah, and so then you obviously you induce hypertrophy, muscle hypertrophy, that whole upregulation of muscle protein synthesis, that obviously leads to downstream more dense muscle fibers, and over time that compounding effect leads to like bigger muscles from a cosmetic standpoint. And that's basically it's a stress response, and that's why managing oxidative stress and also just the whole, like, I suppose, fatigue levels as you're training, as you're dieting, or as you're in your off season is really, really important and vital. It's like maintaining all of these, I suppose, variables and contributing factors so that you can get the biggest ROI with the minimum, I suppose, like cost when it comes to your health and your well-being.
Yeah, and then that's the thing, like people that are doing it on themselves that don't have what we have in terms of knowledge or experience, and that's why experience pays dividends as well, because textbook knowledge, as we know, it's textbook knowledge, but there's a big difference between textbook and experience combined with textbook. But it's super important, like for people that don't have any idea, like we're talking about, it's like, you apply these stresses, but as an athlete, if you're going to try and get to the best you can, unfortunately, you're going to have to push past some points. But, we do have other applications of stress management properties we can do, like for oxidative stress environments, we can apply flavonols, which is like, antioxidants and
even things like N-acetylcysteine, that's got a positive effect. It attenuates oxidative stress. It's also got a host of other benefits because it's a precursor to glutathione production. More bioavailable than orally ingested glutathione. It's like, well, it's got a host of benefits. So like you're right, supplementation, improving the overall quality of the diet, so you're getting more micronutrition on a daily basis, managing sleep, improving sleep hygiene, increasing like your hydration. All of that can play a pretty significant role in like you were saying, in attenuating oxidative stress.
And that's where we go from, like, this is the difference between people with excelling education levels versus basic foundations. They'll be running the basic compounds. Otherwise, you work with someone who's like a specialist and understands it. So that way, if you're trying to be the best of the best and you're competing with the best of the best in the world, unfortunately, you can't guess it. I mean, if you're going to be pushing thresholds, you also need to understand, we want to push this for a period of time. Okay, well, we can apply, X, Y, Z for this duration to lower, this oxidative stress, to manage your adrenal fatigues of this. There's all these different sort of methods we can apply to, one, limit and inhibit the effects of the negative effects of, pushing the compounds or pushing certain thresholds, but also maintaining optimal health. And that's what it's about. It's like, there's not one size fits all approach in the coaching space or in the pharmacology space. It's about understanding, what compounds are doing what, how do people, handle that or metabolize that drug, and then, what is their lifestyle? Because again, like, we can push someone up to, 11 to 14, milligrams of body weight, and someone might handle that, but someone who's not sleeping and also has a very high stressful role probably won't even tolerate that. So this is where unfortunately it's just not enough anymore to have the basic education, and this is why I'd love to have you on, because it's just like people do not see what happens with the internal, and that's the biggest thing with clients as well, and we'll get onto that, is client expectations. Is people see when we deliver a program and they're like, oh, yep, we just got this and this and this at this milligram, or we got, we're just going to take, NAC, and we're going to take a bit of ashwagandha, so these adaptogen products. But they just think it's just a plan.
They don't understand the role.
And it's like, I'm sure you do. I educate the clients as to what we're doing if they want to listen. Sometimes it goes over the head. But it's like, we're doing this for this XY purpose because it's the specific reasons to why we're doing it. But I think a lot of people get plans from people and just go, oh, yeah, it's just this basic thing. Yeah. It's like, no, you're getting the foundations that you just follow, you set and forget, you don't have to think about it. But this is what we do as experts and specialists in our fields. We are literally building roadmaps and, data and data entries behind these plans. And it's all a calculated, precise program. And that's what people don't understand about the coaching space.
It's a reactive approach, because if we take a proactive approach or like dare I say, a cookie cutter approach where you're trying to predict and plan out in advance an entire training like macro cycle, or like yearly training plan or supplementation plan, you just can't do it. You don't have sufficient information, and you don't know how that person will respond as an individual, because like you said, the individual response varies from person to person.
Yeah. That's why it pays dividends to, some coaches like ourselves are probably a little bit higher than the market entry. But, sometimes you pay for what you get.
Exactly, yeah.
And if you're skimming on price and this person that is a little bit higher has far more education, and can definitely deliver you much better results, but you're just favouring the price point.
I think that's a really valid point you made, and not only with I suppose coaching, but just your fitness goals, bodybuilding goals, or competitive like performance athlete goals, or whatever it might be, if you're using money as a determining factor of who you source as a coach or what you do in terms of managing your health, then you're going to suffer in the long run. It's like you can't cheap out on certain things. Like you can't say to me, oh, you can afford to buy drugs, but you're not going to, I suppose, commit to a coach, put money towards a coach if you don't have the adequate understanding of these drugs. Or like you can't say you're going to do drugs and not get blood work on a regular basis. Like all of these things are very flawed. Like these, I suppose, mindsets of, oh, I can afford the drugs, I'll do that, but I'm not going to focus on food quality, spending more money on groceries and cutting back on my recreational spending so I can do that and afford a coach and do it all the right way to try minimize harm, because there is going to be some measurable degree of harm that will come as a result of using drugs. Like the whole, I suppose, health phase it's probably a bad term that some coaches do use in the, I suppose, aspect of performance enhancing drugs of like, okay, we're going into a health phase now after this course. It's probably better to say we're going into a bridging phase where we're going to focus on normalizing everything as much as possible and basically, just allow the internal systems to have a bit of a break from hammering things so much.
And that's what we call negative feedback in the biochemistry world. And another technical term is homeostasis, where negative feedback is the process of the body, and that's one thing I want to touch on as well. So negative feedback is the process of where the body is literally fighting to bring it back to, stability point. Homeostasis is what we call it, which is balance within the body. And that applies with everything. That applies with our blood glucose levels. That applies with our blood pressures. That applies with our hormone levels.
Exactly.
So there's a lot of things that happen in the internal environment that people don't understand. And I want to lead this into the testosterone and blood work kind of thing, right? So I get a lot of questions when it comes to blood work and like you said, more isn't better. So I get guys who go, oh, well, my mate's doing 600 milligrams of testosterone or testosterone. It's like, that's cool, man. But what's his blood's at? So the one thing that people don't understand, like I'm not sure how you work your model, but me personally, I prefer to keep tests at a base.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about this a little bit further with you as well. Like, there's three branches when it comes to forming the family of, anabolics.
The steroid family tree, yeah.
Yeah, which we'll touch on. And that's one thing that I never knew when I first started. So we'll touch on that today. But where I was going with that was like, we use testosterone or testosterone derivatives, so test E's, test P's, stuff like that, as a base. And one thing I see people do is they're just up-regulating that pathway significantly. So if you go and get your blood test done, and our normal ranges from a male is about 5 to about 32 on the blood work. I think that's pretty well what it is.
They might be sitting at like 200.
200. And then look at their E2 or the estradiol.
Yeah, triple the range.
680. And it's like, whoa. You know what I mean? So this is the thing that people don't understand. And this is the process of negative feedback. So, when we apply a drug or anything and it's a stressor, but there's a thing between upregulating a pathway dramatically past the point of what is necessary. And that's the thing where the old knowledge versus now is completely morphed. Yeah. So there's this thing, like people need to understand that like when we apply testosterone as a base as us as males, we don't need to exceed it. It's, we've got other pathways we can tap into to initiate more effects and essentially turn the body into a V8 system rather than just a V1 system. And that's the thing. Like people are going onto these test phases that upregulating to 500 megs. I'm like, okay, well, what was your blood test? Dude, you're already sitting at your highest natural level of 27. Yeah. You're only, 5 below your top score? So why are you putting 500 megs of testosterone in? The one thing that people do, they're like, oh, I want to get big. It's like, you got to understand, man. By upregulating and applying so much to that pathway when you're already at your peak, your body's just going to try and fight that to bring it back to homeostasis, which is back into the normal ranges.
Precisely. Yeah, it's like, more is not always better. And like you said, with the negative feedback loop, that's what people need to really grasp and make sure that they understand. And everyone would really benefit from doing at least first year university chemistry and biochemistry if they are going to be using PEDs, because they'd understand this a lot better, even physiology. But yeah, like you said, the negative feedback process in the body. If your body is normally used to experiencing, say, the equivalent of, let's say, 20 nanomoles per mil of testosterone in your blood concentration, and you're taking testosterone, test E, test C, doesn't matter. Testosterone's testosterone. Doesn't matter if it's Sustanon, It just changes the elimination time that it takes to leave your system, essentially. That's the only thing it changes. They all start working immediately once they enter the body. But let's just say you're on like the typical bro first cycle. I hate the term cycle, and we can go into that later. Using 500 milligrams or 2 mils of testosterone a week, you're going to be well above that threshold of, like you said, the physiologic range or the natural range, which is typically, depending on which pathologist you go through, 8 to 30 nanomoles per mil. That's the range that they, I suppose, have for total testosterone on the blood works test. So if you're sitting in the middle of the range naturally, and then you take test E and say you bump yourself up to 200 nanomole per mil, like several times above the range, like 10 times above the range or whatever, or 10 times above your natural testosterone production, your body is not used to that amount of testosterone. So it's going to aromatize at a higher rate. Your body's going to start producing more aromatase enzyme to try turn more of that testosterone into estradiol to try offset how high it is, because the body's saying in a non-conscious way, this is too much. I don't need this much. This is detrimental for a number of different reasons. So it tries to basically sift some of that into a different hormone to try balance out that homeostatic ratio between testosterone and E2. And then additionally, your body's also going to upregulate 5-alpha reductase enzyme production to try reduce more of your testosterone, that bolus 200 nanomole per mil concentration in your blood down to a lower, more physiologic level. And so it's going to reduce more of that to DHT, dihydrotestosterone. And then you get that whole problem of, okay, now you've not only got testosterone above your natural range or your natural production, you've also got DHT and estradiol above that, and they're going to cause their own negative effects, and that just continues to have more and more of a downstream effect. And you'd probably agree, it's like all of a sudden you're trying to patch all of these holes in the boats, like in the ship's belly or whatever, to try basically hold things together, and it becomes more a problem of like damage control rather than what it was initially meant to be, which was enhancing muscle growth and performance.
Yeah, effective and optimal. It's my two favorite words: effective and optimal.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what it is. It's not effective and optimal. That's what's the purpose?
Yeah.
You're playing catch up, and like you said, damage control.
100%. There is one analogy I would like to kind of mention now, and it's from my mentor, Broderick Chavez. He's a brilliant guy, really, really intelligent, and he hates people probably more than me, I'd say, which is, it's admirable in a way, because I always thought I was pretty antisocial. But yeah, he basically put it this way. It's kind of like a pressure sensitive elevator. When you're natural, to get to, say you're at ground level as a natural, to get to level 1, so this is like, look at each level as kind of like a different, I suppose, tier of enhancement or level of muscularity. To get to level 1, you require a certain amount of pressure. If you don't apply enough pressure, if you don't use enough milligrams, you're not going to be able to reach that. And that's going to be different for every person. Some people hyper-respond to drugs, some people non-responders, and they get pretty much next to no effect from taking drugs, and then other people are just average responders, like a bell curve. You got the 95th percentile and the 5th percentile and everyone in between. And the majority of people are decent at responding, or slightly better than decent, but then you do have those few that respond really well. So the people that respond really well are going to require less to get to each level, but the principle applies the same to everybody. To get to a higher level or a greater potential of muscularity, you require more milligrams. Require more food, you require more recovery and harder or training or more volume, I guess I could say. And if you just say you need 50 newtons of force to get to level 1, or like 200 milligrams to get to your goal of, say, having 5 kilos more of muscle mass, and you just jump straight to 800, you're going to get to your goal, but you're not going to get any higher. It's like muscle growth is capped at a certain rate, even when you're enhanced. And that comes back to, none of the drugs are really better than others when it comes to muscle growth. They all accrete protein at a pretty similar, or dare I say, identical rate. Yeah. So tren builds muscle pretty much at the same rate that testosterone or nandrolone or primobolan. Doesn't really matter what you choose. At the end of the day, they're all going to accrete at protein at a similar rate. It's the secondary effects that differ between compounds. It's like, which secondary effects do you want? to leverage to basically make the entire course more, like you said, optimal and efficient, or optimal and effective. But yeah, I mean, back to the analogy, because I went a little bit off tangent there. If you want to get to level 1, the elevator is pressure sensitive. 200 milligrams will get you there. Say that 200 milligrams per week, 800 milligrams per week will get you there, but it's going to cause a lot of problems as well. But if you want to get to, say, level 2, you might need 400 milligrams. So it's pressure sensitive. So as you progress, same thing as a natural, like your effective dose is substantially lower when it comes to training volume. When you first start lifting, like one working set will be enough to promote muscle growth, and you'd agree, hey, when you first step foot in the gym. 3 years down the track, one working set probably isn't going to be enough to promote muscle growth. You're probably going to be built. You might be able to start at 1 or 2 working sets in the first week of your training block, but you're going to have to titrate that up to, say, 4 or 5 working sets by the end of the block. And this is assuming you're not like flat out taking things beyond failure. If you do that, you probably can't recover from more than 1 or 2 sets. But that's a bit of a somewhat flawed way of training. But yeah, as you get more experienced, as you progress, the demand required to get to that next level increases. So it's like, that's why more isn't better when you start. And it's why these guys that are impatient, that are taking drugs straight off the bat when they first get into the gym, first start training, are making a big mistake. Because literally doing one working set, eating properly and sleeping well is going to be enough to get you to build 5 or 10 more kilos of muscle in the next 12 to 24 months. But instead of that, you're going to take drugs thinking that it's going to be better, and you're probably not going to have all the other things dialed in. So you're really only using the drugs as a crutch to achieve what you otherwise could have achieved naturally in a healthy manner. And so it's like, you'd agree with that, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's where it comes down. Like, it pays dividends to work with a coach, because we are our own worst enemies, and we are not very good at analysing ourselves on that subjective level. You know what I mean? We always think we're better than what we are, or we think we're shitter than what we are, worse than what we are. So, so our own emotional attachment to ourselves is what falters and leads to problems with our decision making. So having someone who has an analytic approach to you as a profile, as an individual, can then make accurate milestone adjustments to your plans and adherence in order to get you through that pressure elevator, like we're talking about, and it comes at your different stages. And again, it goes back to being patient and building those bricks, which is what we talked about at the very start of this podcast. You've got to lay the foundation. Unfortunately, not going to be Ronnie Coleman by next week. Like, sorry. It's no much how much you take. You know what I mean? So it's, again, you guys got to start coming into the space. If you want to be a competitive athlete, be prepared to do the work and take the time. If you just want to be, a healthy, all-round better person, again, don't rush the process, but look to build the skill sets throughout the time and the journey. You don't even have to apply pharmacology, and I wouldn't even suggest it, because, again, the risk of it isn't enough to outweigh what you're trying to achieve. You know what I mean? So, you want to come in, and if you just want to be an average, healthy person, mum, dad, whatever, but still look good, enjoy to lay the bricks and then learn the skill set to move forward in that direction. And apply those skill sets and those disciplines, those routines through all your facets. Start focusing on relationships, start focusing on business or career opportunities, or anything that you can do in your own life. It doesn't always have to fall back to jumping on pharmacology or drug applications just to look good.
100%. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. And that's the thing; it all feeds into each other. Like, you apply the same things to, like you said, your relationships, your sleep, your work. Like work ethic at your job. If you do all of that, like, it has a return effect on your training, and your training, your stress levels, your recovery, your well-being improves. And it's a cyclical process of, like, you put effort into every facet of life, and it has a positive trickle over effect onto every facet of life. And it just helps propel you forward in every aspect of life, not just the gym or not just work. So it's really beneficial because it's so multifaceted. And I liked the point that you made about what was it that we just covered just before that? It was
about laying the foundations, the bricks, not rushing it. Was it before that?
Yeah, I think it was. It was, but yeah, it'll come back to me if it's important. It'll come back to me. So yeah.
Cool.
Let's move on.
That's all right. So yeah, before we move on, like, we're gonna come close to our time here, but I wanted to touch on the pathways very quickly. when it comes to building the tree of anabolic family. So one thing that this is the biggest game changer when it came to me understanding, the anabolic family, how to apply things, and how to again set up my model for greater optimal and efficient protocols. So when we look at the family, we have the testosterone derivatives, which, like we said, would hold the test Cs, test Ps, sustenance, whatever else I missed out of that. But that's typically the test-based. Boldenon also falls under that category as well. And then we've got the 19-nor-testosterones. So that's your MPPs or your nandrolone and tren bases, so acetates and anthates. And then, like you brought up, which was really good that you brought up, so when you're talking about the aromatizing, when we increase the testosterone derivative, we also see that conversion going into DHT pathway.
Yeah.
What we call a dehydrogenased testosterone derivative pathway. And some simple compounds that can fall under that would be like, your Anavars, your Winstrels, Orstenas, Masterons. There's a lot of different compounds that can fall under that bracket.
Yeah, I think from memory, DHT derivatives are the biggest in the entire steroid family tree in terms of the number of, I suppose, downstream compounds that fall under that specific category. Yeah, like you said, you got stanozolol, you've got Primo, you've got Anavar, a bunch of others, and yeah, it comes down to like you said, having a more I suppose well-rounded understanding of pharmacology, the roles that each drug plays, or the the impact, both desired and undesired, that each compound has in the system or in the body when you use it, because some have certain qualities that you might find desirable when paired with other compounds from a different category of the steroid family tree, whereas others you might be doubling up on something that you don't want if you stack them together. So yeah, I agree. It comes down to thoughtful, methodical planning. DHT derivatives basically are known to be non-aromatizing. They are also, depending on which compound it is, Primo actually lowers E2 levels in the bloodstream, whereas Masteron doesn't necessarily lower E2, but it does have a positive effect on attenuating estradiol-related side effects like gynecomastia, because it reduces binding at the mammary glands or at the glands under your nipples. So that's the reason why if people are experiencing gynecomastia, then they might resort to incorporating one of those and lowering the testosterone dose, as opposed to throwing in an aromatase inhibitor, which we know is neurodegenerative. It can cause negative effects on cardiovascular health over time. There's a lot of issues with aromatase inhibitors, but that was the old school approach. 500 tests a week. If you get sensitive nipples, throw in an aromatase inhibitor. But now we know that's a bit of a flawed approach, or a flawed course.
I call those kind of things like Band-Aid solutions.
Yeah.
It's like we're just applying a Band-Aid to the problem rather than stopping the problem.
It's like increasing caffeine consumption, back on that topic that we covered earlier, instead of working on improving your sleep.
Yeah, or just getting a bit more hydration.
Yeah, Band-Aids versus the underlying root cause, address the, like you said, root issue, as opposed to just throwing or slapping something on that helps but is going to cause another problem elsewhere.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
It might help for now, but again, there'll be another hole because there's way too much pressure in the system. There'll be another hole that will come out somewhere later down the track. So.
Yeah, and that's why, even if you go DHT derivatives, sometimes one of the DHT derivatives is more suited than one of the others for your specific application of your course right now. Say, let's go back to the old testosterone. You and I, like you were touching on, I believe, you like to keep testosterone at the level that fulfills the physiologic needs for testosterone, and then use other things ideally to promote additional growing.
Yeah, the anabolic effects.
Yeah, and if obviously introducing those things throws off the ratio of testosterone to estradiol, then you might increase the testosterone dosage a bit to improve the overall balance of things. Yeah. But let's say somebody's running testosterone, and let's say that their E2 is in the normal range, it's not necessarily higher, but they're experiencing some unwanted symptoms of gynecomastia. Well, introducing some Masteron might be a solution then, because it's not going to have an effect on serum E2 levels, but it will have an effect on attenuating some of those unwanted side effects or unwanted effects of the high of estradiol, I should say, because it's going to reduce the binding affinity, which is going to help with that problem without negatively impacting the estradiol, because we know estradiol E2 is really important for growth, and it's also important for protecting your neurons, like your actual
The
brain
old
cells.
thing back in the day was get rid of it.
Yeah, it's
Try to
bad.
shut it down.
Yeah, kill your IGF production while you're at it too. That's I think that's a big reason why back when Liver King, like, I mean, everybody's heard about that, when his like drug usage was exposed, he was on pharmaceutical growth and he was on a stupid amount of IUs of growth per day. He should have had like top of the range IGF-1 levels or above, and his growth hormone levels should have been pretty high, that sort of thing, but they were in the gutter. And I thought to myself, why is that? And I looked at the rest of his stack, I guess you could call it, and it was just a bunch of DHT derivatives. There wasn't really any estradiol, and so his IGF-1 production would have been getting like floored by that. And I believe that's why, and that's why it's so important to thoughtfully plan out what you're doing. It's not as simple as just slapping this in because, oh, this has this effect. If you don't understand how this interacts with this, you might not get either benefit.
Yeah. And that goes back down to understanding, and just, again, if you don't know and you don't want to have the time to research it or learn or study it,
outsource someone.
Outsource, but typically even outsourcing, even if you do know, is always vital, you know what I mean? But outsourcing to someone that you align with, someone that you trust, you know, like I'd come to you, like, because we align on the values and stuff like that. Like I'd be coming to someone of your kind of caliber.
And likewise.
You know, because that way you can have constructive conversations. It's not being told what to do, and you can then both plan strategically for the right step forward.
Collaboratively planning.
That's it, and that's an effective way for people who are, you know, at the same sort of level. And again, if you do want to learn, it's always vital to pay that dividend to work with someone that does know.
Yeah.
And it just comes back to, you know, outsourcing, but, you know, having the right people around you, and don't always listen to your bros.
Yeah. And like you said earlier, like emotions can really influence our decision making, and not to our benefit, to our detriment. And I mean, we definitely see that in contest prep. Like as you get closer and closer to show, your mind starts becoming your own worst enemy. And having a coach in your corner, a learned coach that you trust and align with in terms of values, and someone who has like a learned understanding of everything that needs to be understood for it, is really, really vital, and a lot of the time undervalued. Because I mean, when you can no longer make those rational decisions yourself, it's good to have someone in your court who can help you with that and prevent self-sabotage from taking place. And
I like the way you said undervalued, and that's a very big thing. We're very undervalued. But look, that's I think we've covered a lot of great content for the day, man. So thank you for coming on board.
Pleasure.
We hope the audience has taken a lot of helpful information from both of our discussions, and hopefully we can challenge some people's mindsets to open up. That's one thing I notice is a lot of closed-minded people, you know, they don't like the idea of changing concepts or methods, but, you know, the world is changing, and I think coming into the world with an open mind is one of the best things to move forward, to excel your potential, your learning, and all things, you know, in your life. So, you know, hopefully you guys can listen in. If it's helpful for someone, share it on, repost it. But again, you guys can also now head over and follow Coach Nick Weir. So just want to give them your Instagram so I don't stuff it up, and any other socials that you have, so that way they can jump on and find you.
Yeah, sure. A shameless plug. At Coach Nicholas Weir, CoachNicholasWeir. That's my Instagram handle. In there's a link in my bio where you can also find my website, YouTube channel, and I'll probably leave it at that, so it's easier than me just rattling off each individual social platform. Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, guys, so jump over onto his Instagram, but again, like always, we'll put all of his links below in the description. And thank you very much for coming on board, man. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's an honour.
Cheers.